So I first came to Buddhism in college. 1997 it would be, my first year in college, 97 or 98. And I'm from Missouri. I grew up in a small town halfway between St. Louis and Springfield, Missouri. And I went to school in Springfield, Missouri at what is now Missouri State. Grew up in a Christian background, but I was never very serious about it. And by the time I was a freshman in college, I had no religious affiliation. I had interest in philosophy, but I really hadn't done much with that. I was still just a freshman. So to meet one of the requirements, I took a world religions class, and I found it interesting because I'm a historian and I like history as well. And as soon as I heard about Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths, at that moment I realized I'm a Buddhist, just like that. And so that day or thereabouts, I went to the school library to the small world religion section. And as I walked in, I had this feeling that everybody was staring at me, like as I'm going to this strange area of the library, not the business section, not the history section, but the small world religion section. And I got a book, The Way of Zen by Alan Watts, and went home, and right then I began my journey. So in English it's not rendered really well, but it would be that life is suffering is the way it's generally rendered, but life is incomplete, or life is unsatisfactory is probably the best way. But there's just not a great English word for dukkha, which is life is dukkha. It would be suffering is a little bit too far. So it could be as far as suffering, but it could also just be the troubles of everyday life or anxiety or stress. So life is that. And that is caused by our desires, or either our desires for things to change the present moment, or our desires also to push things away from this moment, to try to make this moment perfect, and believing that there is something permanent that can make this moment perfect, external to our own minds. There is a way out of this suffering, and that way out is the Buddhist path, the Eightfold Path. Absolutely. Buddhism, for me, there's certainly a religious aspect, but as I think very scientifically and philosophically, that's the way that I view my Buddhist practice. I started coming to MABA in 2012. So prior to 2012, I read everything I could on Buddhism, on Zen and meditation, and practiced on my own. I practiced on my own for so long. Part of it was I just didn't know that there was some place to go, and I wasn't involved in any spiritual communities, so it was just me on my own practicing and reading. The benefit of being part of a community is the fact that you're part of a community. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have issues either spiritually, personally, economically, you have then a community of people who are like-minded to help you through the process. When I first came to MABA, I had a lot of questions, and I was afraid that I wouldn't know the right way to stand and sit and bow because I was just a self-practicing Buddhist. Yeah. But as soon as I got here, and hopefully it's the same today, and I know that it is, that you are welcomed immediately. And if you have questions, they're answered. If you have questions about the services, the way the services go, the sitting, the chanting, the questions are answered. So those worries that I had were dispelled immediately. I was welcomed, and so that made the transition from being a self-practicing Buddhist to a coming to MABA very easy. And just it's really remained the same. It's a community of like-minded people. I bring my kids here frequently, whether it's on a Sunday, they've come to the children's services plenty of times, or even when I'm working here, they'll come with me. If you're practicing Buddhism, it's pretty impossible to remove it from your everyday life. So you're thinking about cause and effect when raising kids, and not just that. You teach, at least myself, I teach my kids about cause and effect and how they got to where they're at today. If they're feeling a certain emotion, we'll think about how you came to that emotion. If you don't like the way you're feeling now, what can you do in the future to change that? And so I think that if you're practicing Buddhist, it's not even possible or reasonable to remove Buddhism from parenting. I would say that the people in my life who are not Buddhists, they still think very similarly to Buddhists. Mm-hmm. So they're all socially engaged and thinking about cause and effect and how to make the world a better place. A lot of weight is put on the label, and the idea of the label is probably what kept me from looking for a place to go for so long myself, because I thought, well, maybe I'm not really a Buddhist. I just, but then once I arrived, I realized once I started coming to MABA, I saw that everybody here is just like me. Everybody's on their own journey. So the teaching at MABA is well-rounded, I would say. You have folks like myself who will give teachings, who weren't raised in a Buddhist background, so we weren't Buddhist from birth. We, through causes and conditions, came to Buddhism, each person in their own way. And so you have first-generation Buddhists from the United States, such as myself, giving teachings. Then you also have folks who were raised in Buddhist societies giving teachings, who have been Buddhist for quite some time. And the teachings are both Mahayana and Theravada in nature. So we're studying original Buddhism, and then we're also studying Chan Buddhism. So we have a good mixture, and if you come week to week, each teacher is giving a different view or a different take on a given topic. So the teachings at MABA are quite well-rounded. Well, most of my coworkers are also either Buddhist or Buddhist in nature, working here at MABA. And in my other business, in regards to the Four Noble Truths or any aspect of Buddhism, looking at cause and effect, I understand if I look at the other person, how I could, if I was in their position, how I would be experiencing any given situation, and how I would want the other person to react towards me. So I think about that, and I know that if I act in a certain way right now, the future is going to be one way or the other. So if I act out of greed, hatred, delusion, that is going to manifest in the future. But if I act from compassion, loving kindness, joy, equanimity, that's going to manifest something different in the future. So I just try to remain within those positive boundaries, because the future is still going to be conditioned. Yes. But through Buddhism, you can learn to set the conditions today in place to manifest future outcomes that are beneficial to yourself and others, as opposed to being completely out of control, acting out of human desire, and then everything is haywire in the future. Instead, we can act from a place of joy, equanimity, compassion, loving kindness. The future is still going to be conditioned by what's happening right now, but you're going to be on a different path of conditioning. Instead of on the path of suffering, troublesome outcomes, you're on a path of compassion. So in regards to how does Buddhism interact with Christianity, from my view, there are people who go to MABA, who attend services here, who are also Christian, and certainly a large amount of people come from a Christian background. I myself was raised Methodist, and I went to church and Sunday school up through sometime in high school, I would say. And it was for community, I would say, more than anything. My friends were there and my family was there. But like I said, there are Christians who practice Buddhism. You can be a Christian Buddhist if you choose to be. You can be a Jewish Buddhist. You can be you can be a philosophical Buddhist. So the point of the Blue Lotus House is that the female residence hall was a small 110, 120-year-old house. The original portion of the house was built in the maybe mid to late 1800s, and it was too small. We needed a lot more room, and we needed room to be able to grow, and also room so that in the future we can have longer-term retreats. That's a big part of the purpose for the Blue Lotus House. So now in the past we've had weekend retreats, maybe up to 4-day retreats, but in the time I'm becoming here, I don't recall anything more than a 4-day retreat, and it would be pretty crammed. I always would, on those longer retreats, stay in a tent, so there would be room for others inside. With the addition of the Blue Lotus House, we'll be able in the future to have longer-term meditation retreats, which personally will be good, and for the community will be great as well. Yeah, and within the Blue Lotus House, there's a meditation hall. There will be a library, kitchen and dining area, community areas, communal areas, and it's just an absolutely beautiful facility. Yeah, so one thing is there's a nice aspect to anxiety or whatever is going on right now is that it's impermanent. So it is not going to last forever, and it may feel like it's going to last forever, but if you look at the happy moments, those also don't last forever. And the entirety of the Buddhist practice, before I came to Buddhism, I had high anxiety. And it was just generalized anxiety, the type that you can't really put your finger on. You don't know. In fact, you wake up with that feeling in the morning and you start searching for the reason because why do I feel this way? But the practice of Buddhism, through the mental practice, increasing your knowledge, your wisdom, and then also the training of the mind through meditation, these things together will, from my experience, this is my own experience, took care of my anxiety, took care of restless thoughts, monkey mind. These things were extinguished through Buddhist practice. So if somebody's having anxiety, their mind is racing, they're fearful of the future, they're worried about the past, there's no better cure from my own experience than Buddhist practice. If I was to give a talk today and not to prepare, just to start talking, I guess it would be basic Buddhism. I would talk about Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the way that Buddhism can help to cut through the suffering of life, the troubles of life, the incompleteness of life, and the worries within the mind and body, to quench that uneasiness. Mm-hmm. And I would discuss that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you.